Deep within the sapphire depths of the unknown, a revelation is waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to dive. Experience a journey of discovery that will change your perspective on what is truly possible. Hit subscribe now and let the deep blue reveal its greatest secret.
Work nights. Not every night, but most of them. 4 days on, 3 days off, rotating through a schedule that my body still hasn't fully accepted even after 6 years. I'm a freight rail conductor for a regional line out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I sleep when other people are eating dinner. I eat breakfast when other people are getting ready for bed. My neighbors have waved at me maybe a dozen times total in the 3 years I've owned my house, because we're almost never awake at the same time. That's important. I need you to understand that first. I bought the house in the spring of 2021. Small craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Garner, about 20 minutes from the rail yard, 3 bedrooms, which was more than I needed. I'm divorced. My daughter lives with her mother in Nashville, but the price was right and the bones were good. The previous owner had kept it clean. No major repairs needed. I put 20% down and moved in with a truck full of furniture I'd picked out by myself for the first time in my adult life. I won't pretend I wasn't lonely. I was. I'd been married for 11 years, and even a marriage that stops working leaves a shape in your life when it's gone. I kept the extra bedrooms closed. I cooked for one. I got used to the quiet. My schedule meant I was home on weekdays and gone Thursday through Sunday nights most weeks, with some variation. I'd leave around 4 in the afternoon and get back sometime the following morning, depending on the run. There were stretches where I'd be away from the house for 36, 40 hours at a time. Sleep, eat, go back out. I didn't have a security system. I had deadbolts on the front and back doors and a lock on the garage. That had always been enough. My next-door neighbor, an older man I'll call my neighbor, he insisted I just call him by his first initial, T, which I always thought was an odd thing. He kept an eye on things, not in a nosy way, in a decent way. He knew my schedule loosely, knew when my truck should and shouldn't be in the driveway. He texted me occasionally if something looked off. He texted me once to say a branch had fallen on my back fence in a storm. I appreciated him more than I ever told him. The first text that started all of this arrived on a Wednesday in March. I was in the crew lounge at the yard, waiting for my run to be called. My phone buzzed, and I looked down and saw it was from T. The message said, "Wanted to mention, there's been a white cargo van parked in your driveway a few weekends in a row. Figured you knew but wanted to check." I read it twice. I didn't own a cargo van. I drove a 10-year-old Tacoma. I had no friends with a cargo van. I had no contractor scheduled to do any work, no deliveries expected, nothing that would explain a vehicle sitting in my driveway on multiple weekends while I was gone. I texted back, "What do you mean a few weekends? Like, how many?" He replied within a minute, "At least 3, maybe 4, always Saturday. Gone by Sunday evening. Figured it was something you'd arranged." I sat with that for a moment. 3 or 4 Saturdays. That meant this had been going on for over a month, and I hadn't noticed a thing. I called T back instead of texting. He picked up on the second ring. He described what he'd seen. A white cargo van, no markings, parking in my driveway sometime in the late morning on Saturdays. He'd seen a person male, he thought, medium build, using a key to go in through the front door. No forced entry. Just walking in like they live there. I said, "A key?" He said, "Yeah, just unlocked it and went in." I thanked him and hung up. I sat in that crew lounge for a long time after that. My run wasn't called for another 2 hours, and I spent most of that time staring at the wall trying to think of any explanation that made sense. I hadn't given anyone a key. I had 2 copies, one on my keyring, one in a lockbox in my bedroom closet. My ex-wife had never had one. We bought the house after the divorce was finalized. My daughter was 9 years old and didn't have one. My brother lived in Tennessee. My parents were both gone. I had not given anyone a key. The only other person I could think of who'd had access to my house was my cousin. I'll call him my cousin, because that's what he was, technically. His mother and my father were siblings, which made us first cousins, though we'd grown up in different states and weren't close. He'd helped me move in back in 2021, showed up with his truck, spent the weekend, and I'd given him a key temporarily so he could make a hardware run while I was unpacking. I remembered asking for it back. I remembered handing me something. But now, sitting in that crew lounge in March, I realized I had never specifically checked that the key he returned was the one I'd given him. It had been 3 years. I ran my whole run that night in a fog. 60 miles of track, and I barely registered any of it. By the time I got home Friday morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to change the locks yet. Not right away. I wanted to know what was actually happening. I went to a big box hardware store on Friday afternoon and bought 2 small cameras, the kind you can set up without a professional, battery-powered, motion-activated, linked to an app on your phone. I put one above the front door, angled toward the driveway, and one inside pointing at the entry hallway. I used adhesive mounts and made sure neither one was obviously visible from outside. I didn't tell anyone I'd done this. Not T, not my supervisor, not my brother. I set the app up on my phone and watched the test footage, and then I went to work Thursday night like normal. Saturday morning, around 10:15, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I was 2 counties away, sitting in a siding waiting for a freight train to clear the main line. I opened the app. The driveway camera showed a white cargo van pulling in. The timestamp said 10:17 a.m. A man got out of the driver's side. He was somewhere in his 30s, I thought, wearing a canvas jacket. He walked to my front door without hesitating, pulled out a key, and let himself in. I watched this happen on a 3-inch screen on my phone while I was 2 counties away, and I could not do a single thing about it. I called the non-emergency line for the Garner Police Department. I explained what I had. Cameras, footage of someone entering my home with a key, a pattern going back at least a month. The officer I spoke with was patient and not unkind. He explained that without being able to demonstrate the person didn't have permission to be there, since they were using a key, not breaking in, it complicated things. He said if I hadn't actually revoked anyone's access in writing, it got murky. He suggested I change my locks and document everything. He was right. I knew he was right. But I wanted to know what was happening inside my house, what this person was doing in there. Whether they were alone. I waited. When I got home that Sunday, earlier than usual, around 6 in the morning, I didn't pull into the driveway. I parked 2 streets over and walked back. The van was gone. I went inside. The house looked normal at first. Then I went into the kitchen. The dish rack had dishes in it. Not my dishes. Well, they were my dishes, my plates, but they'd been used and washed and stacked. I hadn't left dishes in the rack. My kitchen was always bare when I left because I'd learned the hard way that leaving dishes out invited bugs. I opened the refrigerator. There was a half-empty case of craft beer on the bottom shelf that I hadn't bought. A Ziploc bag with leftover something, a store-brand container of cream cheese, mostly used. I stood there looking at my refrigerator for a long time. Then I walked through the rest of the house. The living room had been rearranged slightly, not dramatically, but the couch had been pushed back a few inches, and the coffee table was at a slightly different angle. The rug had been rolled back on one side and not quite rolled back the right way. The guest bedroom, the larger one, the one with the queen bed. The bed had been slept in and made back up, not the way I make a bed. Neater, with the pillow positioned differently. There were faint impressions in the comforter like someone had smoothed it by hand. The bathroom between the 2 guest rooms had a trash can that wasn't empty. I hadn't left anything in it. There was a paper towel and a gum wrapper and what looked like the backing from a bandage. Someone had been using my house. Not breaking in. Using it. With a key. Like it was a rental. I sat down on the edge of my own bed in my own room, which, thankfully, showed no signs of being entered, and I just breathed for a while. There was a part of me that wanted to call my cousin right then and there. Confront him directly. But I didn't know for certain it was him, and if I tipped someone off before I had something solid, whoever it was would just stop and I'd never know the extent of it. I checked the camera footage from Saturday instead. The man with the canvas jacket had come in at 10:17. At 11:04, 2 more vehicles arrived, a sedan and a pickup truck. 4 people total entered my house in the space of an hour. At one point, the indoor camera caught a glimpse of the living room. Folding chairs had been set up. Someone had a cooler. There was music, though the camera didn't capture audio well enough to make out the song. At 7:22 p.m., they all left. The man with the canvas jacket was last. He did a walk-through. I watched him on the hallway camera, and then he left and locked the door behind him with the key. 4 people in my house. Using my guest bedroom. Rearranging my furniture. eating food out of my refrigerator. I went through the house more carefully this time and found things I'd missed. There was a surge protector plugged into the outlet near the TV that wasn't mine. A phone charger left plugged in by the nightstand in the guest room. A partial roll of paper towels in the cabinet that I knew I hadn't bought. Wrong brand. I checked my utility account online. My electric bill for February was $47 higher than January. Water usage was up too, not by a massive amount, but measurably. I pulled up January and compared it to November and December. The pattern had started in November. I thought back to November. My cousin had come through town in October to visit a friend, and I'd let him crash at my place for 2 nights. That was the last time I'd seen him. That was when he would have had access. I didn't confront him that week. I spent a few days thinking it through. I talked to a lawyer, a friend of a friend who did property law, and she laid out my options. Changing the locks was step 1, non-negotiable. After that, if I could catch someone in the act, I'd be in a much stronger position legally. She also said I should document the utility increases as evidence of unauthorized use. I changed the locks on Tuesday. New deadbolts, front and back. I did not tell my cousin, or whoever it was, that I'd done this. The next Saturday, I watched my phone. At 10:22 a.m., the van pulled up. The man with the canvas jacket walked to my front door with his key. He put it in the lock. He tried to turn it. He tried again. He stepped back. He looked at the door. He looked at the key. He looked at the door again. He stood there for about 45 seconds, which felt like a very long time when you're watching it on a phone screen. Then he got back in his van and drove away. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my cousin. He didn't say hello. He said, "Hey, did you change your locks?" I said, "Yeah." There was a pause. He said, "Oh, I was gonna come by, drop some stuff off for you, but the key didn't work." I said, "What key?" "Didn't work." I said, "What key?" Another pause. I said, "I want you to tell me what's been going on." He didn't answer right away. When he did speak, he was calmer than I expected, almost casual. He said it was just a thing he'd been doing, meeting up with some guys on weekends, and my place was convenient, and I was never home anyway, so it hadn't seemed like a problem. He said they were always careful, always cleaned up. I asked him how long. He said since November. I asked him if he'd been charging people to be there. The pause this time was longer. He said it was just a thing he was helping cover costs for his own gas and time, driving out to Garner. I asked him again. Directly. Was he charging people to use my house? He said, yeah, he'd been asking people to chip in $50 each, and there were usually 4 or 5 people, and it happened most weekends. 4 people, $50 each, most weekends, from November to March. That was somewhere around 16 to 20 weekends. That was potentially $3,000 to $4,000 he'd collected using my house without my knowledge or permission. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that. I was not calm exactly, but I didn't yell. I told him I had camera footage. I told him I already talked to a lawyer. I told him what he'd done was unauthorized use of my property, and that I had evidence of it going back months. He started to say something about how I was never home anyway, how it wasn't hurting anyone, how the house was just sitting there. I said, "It's my house." I filed a police report that afternoon. The detective I spoke with was more helpful than the first officer. Once I explained I'd changed the locks and had footage and documentation of utility increases, the picture was clearer. She said it likely met the threshold for unauthorized use of premises under North Carolina law, and potentially more depending on whether the money he collected constituted commercial activity on my property. I forwarded her the camera footage. I sent her the utility comparisons. I wrote out a timeline. My cousin hired a lawyer. His lawyer contacted my lawyer. There were some back-and-forth letters. Eventually, he agreed to pay restitution, a number we negotiated that covered the utility overages, and a flat sum that I won't disclose specifically, but was enough to matter. We haven't spoken since the phone call. His mother, my aunt, called me once, about 2 months later. She wanted to tell me I was being dramatic. The family shouldn't sue family, that her son had made a mistake and I was blowing it up. I let her talk. When she was done, I said that her son had been taking money from strangers to use my home for 5 months without telling me. and that it wasn't a mistake so much as it was a sustained decision made over and over again each week. She didn't have much to say to that. We haven't spoken since either. My daughter came to visit in the summer. First time she'd stayed over at my house. I bought a new comforter for the guest room, the one my cousin and his friends had used, because I didn't want her sleeping on it. I know that might seem like an overreaction. It wasn't to me. She's 9. She thought the bungalow was cool. She liked the backyard. She asked me why I had so many cameras. I told her it was because I wanted to make sure the house was safe when I wasn't home. She thought about that and said, "Does it work?" I said, "Yeah, it does." There are a few things I've thought about a lot since all of this. The first is how long it might have gone on if T hadn't texted me. He almost didn't. He told me later that he'd almost not said anything because he figured I'd arranged it and he didn't want to seem like he was prying. He waited 3 weeks before he finally sent the message. If he'd waited another month or just decided it wasn't his business, I might still not know. The second is the key. I've replayed that moment from 2021 over and over. My cousin handing me something, me taking it and putting it somewhere and not looking at it. I'm almost certain now that what he gave me back was a different key, a blank, or a key to something else. It would have been easy. I wasn't paying attention. He'd had 3 years to use that key whenever he wanted. The third is the money. He'd built a small side income on my property. He knew my schedule well enough to feel confident about when I'd be gone. He'd vetted people, apparently. It was always a small group. People he knew. He'd managed it like a quiet little operation for 5 months without a single problem. If he'd been a little more careful, a little more exact about putting things back, a little more modest about the beer in the fridge, he might have gone a lot longer. I think about that and it doesn't sit well with me. I still work nights, still drive the same runs out of Raleigh, still live in the bungalow in Garner. I replaced both deadbolts with keypad locks. No physical keys at all. The cameras are still up. I added one in the backyard and one pointing at the garage. T knows about all of it now. I told him the whole story over coffee one morning, his morning, which was my late afternoon. He shook his head a lot and said he was sorry he hadn't said something sooner. I told him he'd said it in time. He'd said it exactly in time. He'd said it exactly in time. My cousin thought the house sitting empty most of the week meant it wasn't really being used, wasn't really being valued. He thought because I wasn't there it didn't matter what happened inside. He was wrong about that. I worked 9 years of night shifts to afford a down payment on that house. I picked every piece of furniture in it by myself. I come home to it after 36 hours on a freight line, and I sleep in it, and it is mine. Every empty room in it is mine. Every quiet weekend it sits there while I'm out on the road. It's still mine. That's the thing about home. It doesn't stop being yours just because you're not in it. I've thought a lot about what made this possible. Not just the key. Anyone can copy a key. What made this possible was assumption. My cousin assumed that because I wasn't there it didn't count, that an empty house wasn't really a home, that absence meant indifference, and I assumed that a key returned was a key accounted for. Neither of us checked. Both of us were wrong, but only one of us caused harm. That's the thing about choices that seem small in the moment. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to do something monstrous. He made one quiet decision. Keep the key, just in case, and then another. Maybe just once, and then another, and another, week after week, for 5 months. Each decision probably felt manageable because the last one hadn't blown up yet. That's how a lot of damage gets done, not in one dramatic moment, but in a long series of small ones, each one made easier by the one before it. I don't think my cousin is an evil person. I think he made a calculation and decided that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me and that my convenience was worth less than his. That's a failure of something I'd call basic moral accounting, the kind that doesn't require religion or philosophy. Just the simple question, would I do this if the other person were watching? He knew the answer. That's why he never told me. What I learned about myself is harder to sit with. I got comfortable. I trusted without verifying. I handed someone a key and accepted something back without looking at it closely, and then I went on with my life for 3 years. Vigilance isn't paranoia. It's just paying attention to the things that matter. My home mattered. I just forgot to treat it like it did. The intelligence part. The part I'm actually proud of was the decision to wait, to put up cameras before confronting anyone, to build a record instead of making a phone call in anger that would have tipped him off and given him time to cover his tracks. Patience in that situation wasn't passivity, it was strategy, and it worked because I stuck with it even when every instinct was telling me to just call him and demand an explanation. Resilience for me looked like this: coming home to a house that felt violated, sitting on the edge of my own bed and deciding not to fall apart, deciding to act instead of react, changing the locks, talking to a lawyer, filing a report, doing the next right thing in sequence until it was handled. It wasn't dramatic. It was just one foot in front of the other until I was standing on the other side of it. My daughter asked me why I had so many cameras now. I told her it was to keep the house safe while I was gone. That's true, but the fuller truth is that the cameras aren't just watching for strangers. They're a reminder, to me, that paying attention is a form of self-respect, that what's yours deserves to be treated like it matters, even when no one else is looking, especially then.